Hey everyone, this is Benjamin Norton and this is Multipolarista. Today we are talking about the Winter Olympics and the new Cold War. And to discuss this, I have the perfect guest, friend of the show, Carl Zha, one of my favorite podcasters, my favorite actual China expert, because there's so many fake China experts in the media who don't speak Mandarin, who can't tell you any provinces outside of Beijing and maybe Xinjiang, because they know that that's the evil bad place. So I love to have Carl on, because he just always blows me away with his incredible knowledge, not only of modern China, but of like Chinese history. And you can see and on the screen behind him his podcast Silk and Steel. I've learned so much about the history of China, the culture of China. So how are you doing, Carl? You're in Bali, Indonesia, right?
Yes, I am. Thank you for inviting me on the show, by the way.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have you. And I mean, let's just go ahead and get started here. There's a lot to say about the Winter Olympics. The first thing I think we could discuss is this diplomatic boycott. We've seen multiple Western governments have said, well, we're going to participate because we can't just not participate and lose, even though they are losing. And so they say, instead of not participating, we're going to have a diplomatic boycott, which means that our politicians are not going to attend the Winter Olympics, which is funny because the Chinese government said, well, you all weren't even invited anyway. So it's like a kid who wasn't invited to a party, and they're like, well, I'm not going to your party. And they're like, well, I didn't invite you to your party. What are you talking about? So I didn't invite you to my party. What are you talking about? So what do you think of this whole diplomatic boycott, and especially the fact that China responded also by inviting Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who attended the inauguration ceremony, and that was a big, and the Western media, that was like the authoritarian axis of China and Russia have united, and Western so-called democracies weren't invited.
I mean, this is so stupid because on one hand, they didn't want to do a full boycott because they know the reason for the boycott is bogus. So they still, because NBC has the rights to the copyrights to Olympics, they still want to make money from the Winter Olympics. So they're, of course, they're not going to boycott it. At the same time, they have to make a grandstanding, to the public that, U.S. really care about the human rights in China. Of course, they don't care about human rights in China. If they really think there's a genocide going on, they should just boycott it straight out. I mean, like I'm talking, they should like boycott, economic sanction, the full works. But no. They know it's bullshit, but at the same time, they have to keep the appearances. So they do this really lame diplomatic boycott. Like as you mentioned, these guys are not invited. And on top of that, who watches Olympics for government officials? Nobody cares. Nobody cares if Biden goes to Olympics or not. I mean, or like, whoever, the Anthony Blinken. I mean, Anthony Blinken is like the least charismatic U.S. official ever. If you replace him with an AI bot, nobody will notice a difference. I mean, like, why would anybody tune in to watch Tony Blinken attending, say, like the Olympics? So this is pretty dumb. And on top of that, like, of course, China is going to invite, China is inviting Russia because the U.S. policy at this current moment is actually driving China and Russia together. This has been the case since the collapse of the Soviet Union, because U.S. has been trying to expand NATO right up to the Russian border, breaking their promises, by the way, to Gorbachev. It's like the late Soviet leader were so naive about the Western intentions, and it was a rude awakening. It took the Russians a while to realize that the West is not their friends, and then currently, with the so-called totally made up Ukraine crisis and the freak out about Taiwan, which people in China and people in Russia, most people don't think there's gonna, like, nobody is saying it's in Russia. In nobody in Russia is expecting Russia is going to invade Ukraine, or nobody in mainland China is expecting PLA will cross the Taiwan Strait to take Taiwan anytime soon. This is all hyped up by U.S. Pentagon sponsored media channels to justify the increasing military budget. Like the Biden just approved like recently what was a new military budget, 700. I think it was $730 million. I mean, yeah,
$768 billion. I
and
mean,
those are just
every year moving toward 1 trillion.
those are just the ones out on the books. I mean,
Yep.
if you add everything together, it's easily over $1 trillion.
Well,
But
the Pentagon has only ever done one audit, and it failed the audit. And then the Pentagon said, well, we expected to fail the audit, so that's not surprising. And they have trillions of dollars of unaccounted money off the books.
And what they do with that money, they funnel into like the bloated programs of like F-35. They just had an F-35 crashing into South China Sea, and China hasn't fired a shot. Like China hasn't done anything, and the F-35 is falling out of the sky. I don't know if you saw the recent news. Okay,
Carl, I don't know. Did you see this graph? We have to be really afraid. Look at this graph. China's military spending has risen steadily over the past decade. Did you see this? I couldn't believe this when I saw this. And at the bottom of the graph, you see China slightly increasing. Meanwhile, the U.S. is like way up in the stratosphere. This propaganda is so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like this. I mean, it's good. It's good griff. It helps them for all these think tankers and their hanger-ons to buy like large McMansions in Virginia, Maryland. I mean, good for them, but it's like people. U.S. always touted itself as like the symbol of democracy, but if you look at U.S. foreign policy, how much how much public input is there? There's none. I mean, I think there was an article. I wish I can pull it up. They actually point out that the U.S. public have almost zero input into the U.S. foreign policy. I mean,
yeah, it was a Princeton study. I'll get it up.
Okay, yeah, I remember that. I had that impression. It was just like we have no say when U.S. is going all over the world, spending crazy amount of money, dropping bombs on weddings and funerals, and we pride ourselves somehow as a democracy.
Yeah, of all places, here's the BBC study. U.S. is an oligarchy, not a democracy. And it was a study published by a Princeton University professor and Northwestern University professor. So it just said very explicitly that people in the United States don't have control over their government, that only rich people do. It's not in any way a democracy. And actually what's interesting is, Carl, I don't know if you saw this joint statement that was published by the Chinese and Russian ambassadors to the United States in November. They published an incredible joint statement that was a response to the U.S. Summit for Democracy, if you remember that joke.
Yeah.
And in their article, which I'll get up, China had a very interesting passage about how it is a vibrant socialist democracy. And they wrote that in the U.S., there's no real democracy. People are just awakened every few years to go and vote, and then they go back into hibernation.
No, this is awesome. Yeah, and I remember somebody I forgot who it was. Somebody posted on Twitter saying, "Well, would China, look at the U.S. If China had 800,000 people die from COVID, would it remain a stable country?" Like he was posting that as like a positive asset of United States system.
Oh my God!
We can let 800,000 people die from COVID and still have a stable political system. But like
we're so good at killing our people, they don't even bat an eye when their neighbors and family members are dying.
Exactly.
Here's this article, Carl. It was incredible. It was published in the National Interest, which is kind of like this foreign policy realist publication in the U.S., and it was published in November. Russian and Chinese ambassadors respecting people's democratic rights. And it was their response to the BS Summit for Democracy, which featured a bunch of right-wing authoritarian regimes, and Taiwan, the province of China. But this is what they wrote, which is pretty incredible. They say democracy is about whether the people have the right to govern their country, whether their needs are met, and whether they have a sense of fulfillment and happiness. If the people are only awakened when casting their votes and sent back to hibernation when the voting is over, if they are served with sweet-sounding slogans in campaigns but have no say after the election, if they are wooed during canvassing but left out in the cold after that, this is not a genuine democracy. And you can tell from the language, this is obviously written by the Chinese diplomat. Like this language is very Chinese. The Russian diplomats have very different rhetoric. But this is incredible. And they also talk about their socialist democracy right here. What China has is an extensive whole process socialist democracy. It reflects the people's will, suits the country's realities, and enjoys strong support from the people. So, I mean, this is the most assertive I've ever seen China when it comes to responding to this BS that China is not democratic and it's authoritarian. They're like, no, we're more democratic than you guys are.
At this point, it's true. I mean, I think Eric Lee was once interviewed. He gave us this famous speech. He said, in US, you can change the government, but you cannot change the policy. In China, you cannot change the ruling party, but you can change the policy. So that's a difference. And people don't realize it because we have been ingrained with propaganda since our birth in United States. We're constantly bombarded by propaganda. We don't even realize, we can't even tell the propaganda from facts anymore. And that's what happened with the Winter Olympics. It's now it's I think now we're really in the full Cold War 2.0 mode, because if you read the China coverage in the Winter Olympics, it's insane. It's pretty insane. I just saw the Vice. It's insane and ridiculous at the same time. I just saw a Vice actually had printed out a whole article about how the Japanese figure skater Yuzuru Hanyu is so popular, and he loves Winnie the Pooh, and this could get awkward in Beijing. This is
so dumb.
This is a headline article, and this is the guy that and then today, actually, from Wall Street Journal, journalist of all people actually posted a tweet about Yuzuru Hanyu's Chinese fans armed with banners and Winnie the Pooh dolls waiting outside the skating venue here in Beijing, posted along with pictures. But even underneath this irrefutable proof, you have someone who says, a commenter says, "Oh, the brave lot, the CCP China don't have a sense of humor about Winnie the Pooh." Like, even presenting with evidence, people still, in their mind, still think, oh, this is some kind of brave act of protest against Xi Jinping.
Well, Carl, I think we even talked about this before. This is like this Western media myth that Winnie the Pooh is like illegal in communist China, and they'll throw you in a gulag if you post Winnie the Pooh. It's so stupid.
Yeah, you just go to Disneyland, Shanghai Disneyland. You can buy Winnie the Pooh anywhere. Oh man.
Well, Carl, I'm glad you mentioned that this is really Cold War 2.0. I wanted to point out they're probably the most respected newspaper in Britain is the Financial Times. The Guardian is the biggest, but everyone knows it's a rag, that it's just the mouthpiece of the British intelligence establishment, intelligence agencies. Probably the most respected newspaper is the Financial Times. And usually they're usually kind of a little less unhinged. Like, usually the Guardian is full on Cold War, and usually the Financial Times is slightly less unhinged. But look at this insane article. They have the Beijing 2022 Panda or whatever it is. And then this is the headline: Beijing Winter Olympics, the new front line in the US-China Cold War. They openly say it. They openly say that this is a new Cold War and that the Olympics are a front line. And then specifically they talk about Uyghur Muslims. And of course, this was one of the controversies at the beginning in the opening ceremony of the Olympics. China had a Uyghur athlete, although the Western corporate media coverage was constantly saying like Chinese athlete with Uyghur name lights torch, and Chinese athlete like in Uyghur clothing lights torch. Like they refused to acknowledge that this athlete could be Uyghur. They said like Uyghur name, Uyghur clothes, but we're not sure if they're actually Uyghur.
And they also made a big deal. There was a headline says, "Oh, the Uyghur athlete disappeared after her competition, after finishing like 46th place." I'm like, okay, well, what do you expect her to do? She just competed in her event. I mean, like she can't go home to her family. And there was actually a clip of her family, like her mother and her aunties cheering for her. And when that clip was being shared on Twitter, social media, the Western media were questioning. So like, they're like, where people are questioning, like, where are all the men? It's almost like, okay, like women cannot have a party by themselves. Uyghur women just cannot have like a women only party. That's not allowed. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, if they have a party with men, then they're violating. Then China, the Communist Party of China, is forcing Uyghur Muslims to violate traditional Muslim norms.
Yeah.
And if they don't have men, then they're also being oppressed by the Chinese communists to not. I mean, whatever. Like, here's this article in the Daily Mail, a tabloid in Britain that supported the Nazis in the 1930s and still supports Ukrainian Nazis today. They say Uyghur skier 20. Who became face of China's Winter Olympics and carried the Olympic torch, disappears after finishing 43rd. It's like, what do they expect her to do? Be on every single TV show being like, yeah, I was in 43rd place. You should, like, what? It's so dumb. But it just shows the degree of the propaganda. No matter what China does, if it builds fast trains, it's attacked for not having slow trains, literally. If it doesn't have fast trains, it's attacked for having slow trains. Whatever China does, the media attacks it because that's the goal, is just to demonize China. It's not to inform people.
And there's there's a very obvious example is someone took the picture of the big air event, the ski track in China, and because with the background of the cooling towers. And they posted, oh, this is such a dystopia. Look at China is building Olympic events in this industrial wasteland, right? And they took a pan out picture of the whole place, but they applied some kind of CNN filter to make it really dark and brown. and it turns out the venue Sougang was. That area was like a heritage site. It was like before this became an Olympic venue. It was the site of 100-year-old a steel plant, a steel mill that was first built in 1919, and it was shut down in 2008. Beijing Summer Olympics, because China wanted to clear up the pollution, and so they shut down the plant. Decommissioned it, but then at the same time, because it's such a heritage site, it has such a long 100-year-old history, so they want to preserve the architectural heritage. So they contacted some Italian design firm to turn this whole place into like an urban renewal project, and building Olympics racetrack there was kind of part of that project, trying to rehabilitate that space. And I saw Beijing residents posting picture of this place in spring and summer. It's actually a very green place. And even for people who have been watching the Olympics, you will notice that the sky was very clear. Like they obviously doctored the photo to make it so very gray and depressing. And so they can post this as example of Chinese dystopia,
Yeah, and Carl, let's talk about there have been some controversies with Eileen Gu.
Yes.
Explain who this is, because the other propaganda. So there's a few propaganda talking points we've heard. One is that China is like exploiting its ethnic minorities and using them as like tokens, as if like the US has never done that ever. I mean, it's so absurd, the hypocrisy. And specifically, I think we should point out that in the opening ceremony, there was this beautiful moment, where I'll get it up in a second, where a representative of, I think there are 43 different nationalities in China, 40 something.
56,
okay,
yeah.
56. And a representative of every different nationality was in a line, and they were handing down the Chinese flag down the line of all of the nationalities in their traditional clothing. So one of the propaganda lines is that China's committing genocide and that it's exploiting, tokenizing these ethnic minorities. The other propaganda talking point, which is extremely stupid, which we'll talk about later because it's just so dumb, is that the food is bad, which is so stupid. And then finally, the most ridiculous propaganda, even more than that, is this idea that Chinese Americans, people of Chinese descent, joined the Chinese team, and therefore they're traitors because they abandoned the great U.S. democracy and they're working for the evil communists, even though they're of Chinese descent. And then what's incredible about that is that they're portrayed as like weaponizing, as Yasha Levine says, like weaponizing immigrants. But what's never mentioned is like, who's this guy? Enes Kanter? Freedom Enes Kanter, or Enes Freedom Kanter, whatever. Like, what percentage of professional athletes in the U.S. are immigrants and are racial minorities? Like the hypocrisy is so ridiculous. As if do they want China's team to be only Han Chinese? Because if they had only Han Chinese athletes, then they would be attacked for having only Han Chinese. But if
Han
they have
supremacy,
but if they have minorities, then they're called tokenizing.
Yes, China can never win. And so the case about Eileen Gu is pretty ugly. The coverage in U.S. media is pretty ugly. They're straight out traitor baiting her. So they're calling her a traitor. First of all, like, step back for a second. When did U.S. declare war against China? Like, when did China become any official enemy state? Right? Like, did Congress pass some resolution? I missed that. I missed that memo. So, but right now, U.S. media is already automatically treating China as an enemy, and so you cannot play for the enemy. And the fact, as you mentioned, there are plenty of athletes who change nationality to play for other countries. This is I mean, many of them play for United States. Okay, that's my tweet, and this is a guy who wrote in Slate, the Olympic Jerk Watch, right? Notice
Justin Peters is his name.
Yeah, Justin Peters. So that's an actual photo of Justin Peters. I found that he himself posted to Slate magazine. He had an article about like the thousands of selfies he took during the pandemic, and that's one of them. So they're like, I just randomly pick one, okay? And like there are other even more unflattering photos you can search for yourself. So this man, a grown ass man, is basically castigating a teenager. So Eileen Gu just turned 18. She's still a teenager, and it's really mind-boggling. All these grown-ass men is jumping on the case of a teenager. And I think Eileen Gu herself responded very well to her haters and critics. She was asked by our Guardian journalist after she won gold. And she basically said, I'm 18-year-old. I'm living my best life. I don't care what other people think. I don't live for other people. I don't skate for other people. And she also said that it's obvious that these my haters don't share my morals. And guess what? I don't care for these people because these people are never going to win the Olympics. and it's true.
Owned.
I think there's a lot of dimensions. There's several layers to this. First, she has Chinese heritage. right? And she was, her mother is Chinese. Her dad is some kind of white American. But her dad was never in the picture because she was raised by her mother. Oh, go ahead. Play that clip. That's her victory speech. And she actually I found somebody commented with a clip of her when she was 13 years old. When she was 13 years old, she said her dream was to compete in the Beijing Olympics and to give the victory speech in Chinese. So she's actually living her dreams. I mean, it's like, yeah, so
literally here she says it's the happiest day of her life. Today is the happiest day of my life.
Yep.
And her Chinese is really good, which is funny because there's like all of this. I think one of the main reasons that she's getting attacked so much is because she's biracial. It's because she's mixed. And so what happens is that threatens her, like, especially ironically, to all of these like Western liberals who claim to be like anti-racist. They have like this weird inferiority complex where they're like, well, she's part white, but she's betraying us and going back to being Chinese, and she speaks Chinese well. And there's all this commentary about, it's like, it shows this not inferiority complex. It's like this weird, like, this idea that she's like a race traitor to white people, but it's all these white liberals who claim to be anti-racists who are now like becoming like David Duke white nationalists.
like they feel like they have some sort of ownership over her. Like, how she is ours. How dare she goes over to the Chinese side? I mean, like, I read some insane commentary like, oh, U.S. is a place that give her the opportunity. U.S. is a place we train her. We financially support her. I'm like, you're crazy. I mean, like in China and former Soviet Union, the athletes are actually supported by the state. We all know U.S.
and they're like superstars.
We all know the U.S. state do not support the athlete. I mean, Eileen Gu was financially supported by her mom, right? Her Chinese mom, who have supported her decision to compete in the Beijing Olympics. And so like people are going all kind of like getting all twisted about her. I think one of the reasons, like you say, is because she's biracial. She's her Chinese heritage. There's always a kind of about the Asian Americans. We're always questioned about somehow like we have some dual loyalty, right? Like we always have to constantly prove ourselves that we are loyal Americans. And I said, I don't have to prove shit. I mean, like being American means I don't have to prove shit to nobody. Why do I have to prove that I'm more loyal to United States? This is bullshit, man. Why is that like and if you look at the Chinese hockey team, for example, Chinese hockey team actually have a whole bunch of white American players, right? And playing for China in the Olympics. But these guys get a free pass. All the media spotlight is on Eileen Gu. Why? Because they figure, okay, these white guys, they could never betray us. but Eileen Gu, how dare she? How dare she choose China? Right? I mean, I think there's that element too.
Well, I think what's so incredible about this is how all of this is happening at the same time as Enes Kanter. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah. Or Freedom like Counter. We'll just call it Freedom Counter.
Definitely not in any way CIA. No way at all. And like at the same time, this guy has become like a massive superstar, even though he doesn't even play well. And he didn't even get picked recently, like in the draft. But he's so anti-China, because he just supports every single U.S. foreign policy prerogative. He's become like this massive star, and he has U.S. citizenship, and no one ever challenged. There's no discussion of that, and like it's seen as great and good because normalizing as a U.S. citizen is seen as like the natural, right? It's seen as natural, and that's like the baseline. So if you challenge that, that's seen as inherently bad because it's like the same way that white supremacy operates, where it's like being seen as white is neutral. Or white is being seen as neutral, and being a U.S. citizen is also seen as neutral. So if you challenge and that's why Eileen Gu is, I think, being attacked so much. One, she challenged the U.S. centric, American centric, narcissism, American exceptionalism, but also the white centric aspect of being like, I could be white passing, but I'm gonna side with China instead of with white supremacy, and like it just blows all of these woke liberals' minds. Like they suddenly just have become white supremacists, and it ignores the fact that all you have to do is look at any professional U.S. sports team, especially soccer. I mean, soccer is like the most international sport.
Yes.
The U.S. soccer team, the French soccer team, like all of those teams are extremely international. They have so many immigrants, and that's never challenged. Actually, when the U.S. does it, it's seen as something good because it's a sign that it's anti-racist. It's a sign that it's a melting pot and it's open to other cultures. But if China does it, it's a sign of betrayal.
Yep. And there's such a like they're trying to like figure out, whether she gave up her US citizenship, like there's always like all these questions reminds me of like the kind of the Obama's birth paper. Like it's the same thing, except now it's done by Americans on the both sides of the aisle, right? Like both the blue and the red are united in condemning Eileen Gu because she abandoned the American dream. The American dream is all you poor immigrants come to US, become upstanding US citizens. We mold you, we shape you, and being a US citizen is like the ultimate end goal in itself, like the end of history, right? But end of man is becoming American. Everybody's a potential American, and once you achieve that dream, this is it. You're not supposed to go back. You're like, for her, her very existence is a repudiation of the whole immigrant American dream narrative, and I think that you are right. That's why everybody is flipping out.
Well, and Carl, let's talk about another person who's kind of related here, which is Zhu Yi. I probably missed Zhu Yi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she gave up her U.S. citizenship, so she is she was a U.S. citizen of Chinese descent, and she also participated. And there's been this propaganda narrative because she didn't do very well, and so there's this propaganda narrative that now in China she's being attacked and demonized because she didn't do well. But you pointed out that actually this is really exaggerated. And then on social media, most of the comments were actually supporting her.
So I first heard about this, because a friend in US pinged me on Facebook, say, do you know anything about this? Oh, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, it's possible. So I actually went down Weibo, the Chinese social media, the equivalent to Twitter, and I type her name tag. There's a super topic. And I look at it, most of the commentary, just like Eileen Gu here pointed out in the comments, that 90% of the comments are positive. And because there's a lot.
Carl, I'm just going to read it for people who can't see the comment. Eileen Gu wrote on Instagram from her official Instagram account. She said, as someone who actually uses Chinese social platforms, I'm going to say right here that over 90% of comments are positive and uplifting. So she's saying that people are supporting Zhu Yi.
Yep. And people are missing the context. There were some people attacking Zhu Yi, and this was because so competing with Zhu Yi for the spot to compete for China, it was another very popular Chinese figure skater, and she has a large fan base in China. So her fans are attacking Zhu Yi for basically taking away the spot of their idol and competing, and then now in their eyes failing. So that's a reason. It's kind of like if you go search Nathan Chen on Twitter. Nathan Chen is the champion of the men's figure skating for United States. And if you search Nathan Chen on Twitter, you will see like the comments is equally divided. There's equal 50% hater versus 50% supporter, and the 50% hater is usually the fan of the Japanese skater Yuzuru Hanyu, the lover of Winnie the Pooh. So there's the same dynamic happens in China, kind of like the fans of different like the groupies are attacking like their idols competitor. And so but in the end, a lot of people did come out to support Zhu Yi, because that's just I can confirm what Eileen Gu said was true, because I went to Weibo myself. I check out the comments.
Yeah, and you pointed out also in this tweet where Eileen Gu is pretty badass. Like, in addition to just being a good athlete, she's pretty cool. She was asked about on, I guess, is this TikTok or where is this?
This is TikTok, yeah.
Yeah, someone said, "Why China though? You grew up in San Francisco." And she responded and she said, "Cry about it." She's just like, I don't give a shit. Like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want. Like, here's this guy, James Tony. Eileen Gu asked about criticism of her on social media. And she said, "If people don't like me, that's their loss. They'll never win the Olympics." And it's like that's where you take that video and then you put on the social media glasses meme,
Gangster.
like the sunglasses meme. That's just badass. Like, you got to respect that. She's mic drop.
Yeah, I mean, I that's why on Twitter I said, okay, this account is not an Eileen Gu simp account. I stand Eileen Gu because she's pretty well spoken, very articulate for her age. I don't know what I was doing 18. When I was 18, I was playing computer games probably. Yeah. And it's true. Like, she actually stated very explicitly her reason for choosing to play for China during the Olympics. She posted on her Instagram back in 2019, June 2019, and she said that because she wanted to build the bridge. She feels like she can be a positive example for young girls in the country where her mom grew up, that's China. And then she feels like she could sports is a bridge to build understanding between nations. And in the end, she put like heart, love China, love US. And she specifically said, I am proud of my heritage and I'm proud of American upbringing. So it's not like she wasn't even like renouncing US, say like, you imperialist pig dogs. She was saying, I love China, I love US, I'm trying to build bridges. And for this, she's being attacked like left and right on the US media. And also she also in her interview with South China Morning Post, she also related an instance during the pandemic. So because she grew up in United States, she was born in US and grew up in US, raised by her single mom. So her mother brought her Chinese grandmother from China to take care of her. So she basically was raised by her mother and grandmother. But during the pandemic, she went out with her Chinese grandma in San Francisco, and there were some crazy guy were yelling like racist remarks about how to her grandma, about how they brought virus to this country. And she was very shocked, and she said, yeah, this is San Francisco, this is the most liberal place in United States, and yet this happens to somebody who I love very much, my grandma. The first time she felt very unsafe, and she has tons of reason to play for China. I mean, but of course, the media is not going to focus on that. The media is not going to focus on what all these Asians being physically assaulted, targeted in U.S. because of their appearances, because of their race, and even the U.S. gymnast, the Olympic gymnast Sunisa Lee. She was recently attacked. People were throwing racist remarks against her in California. I mean, this is. How can somebody fault Eileen Gu for choosing the way she chose? I mean, but that's not how I see it this way, because I'm an immigrant myself. I came to this country when I was 13. I can relate to Eileen Gu, but I guess for most of the people who brainwashed by U.S. propaganda, they don't see it that way. They just see, okay, she betrayed us.
Yeah, Carl, let's talk a bit more about the politics of the different nationalities in China, because we were talking about, specifically the propaganda about Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, and we've talked about that many times. And the propaganda is absolutely preposterous. But there are other nationalities, other ethnic minorities in China, and there's another really stupid narrative is this idea of cultural appropriation that there was this dumb narrative about. But so this is an article in the South China Morning Post. But here's a photo from the opening ceremony, and I mentioned that there was this beautiful moment in the opening ceremony where all of the different nationalities in the country were sharing the flag as they passed down the flag, and they're all in this traditional clothing. And something that you've been doing on Twitter, which I appreciate, as someone who doesn't follow Chinese language media, because if you in my experience, just following Spanish language media, if you don't speak the language, then you miss so much.
Yes.
And especially I think with Chinese media, because it's also different social media. And anyway, so one of the things that you've been doing is kind of highlighting some of the other athletes on the Chinese Olympics team from different nationalities. And here you have Hanayar Adake, which is a Kazakh speed skater from the Olympic team. So again, this idea that there's this idea that's become more and more prominent, this propaganda, ridiculous nonsense that China is fascist and China is like Han supremacist. It's like the stupid thing that they've been saying. And who is that dumb journalist who wrote this article recently about how we have to call China fascist and not just authoritarian? And basically their argument is that the reason that you can call China fascist is because it's supposedly authoritarian in scare quotes, and it's supposedly Han supremacist. But as you've been pointing out, as China honoring these nationalities points out, it's not a Han supremacist society.
And if you look at their rhetoric, their actual rhetoric, they're advocating, splitting China into all these mini ethno states. They want like an ethno states here, ethno states here. So they're the ones who actually want to break up China along ethnic lines into these mono ethno states. At the same time, they're accusing China of being a Han ethno state. It's self-contradictory, but whatever paints China as bad. And there was one go back to the Uyghur athlete who held the torch during the opening ceremony. There are articles in U.S. media compare this to the Nazi 1936 Berlin Olympics, and somebody says, "Oh, imagine if the Nazi did this." Well, guess what? I can't imagine Nazis upholding a Jewish athlete to light the torch, because the Nazi ideology is very specifically, against it's specifically a white supremacist ideology. They would never have an openly Jewish person holding the torch in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. It's that's why I said this kind of saying there's a genocide in Xinjiang. This is literally a Holocaust denial, because because
it's Holocaust revisionism. Absolutely. I mean, here's an article in the Times of Israel, which supports genocide in Palestine in the Gaza concentration camp. The title of this propaganda: "Never Again for Uyghurs. Jews ramping up China protests as Beijing Olympics start." Citing experience of the Holocaust, Jewish groups have targeted international companies that are supporting the Winter Olympics and continue doing business in Xinjiang. So, as explicit as it gets, they're saying China is the new Nazi Germany, which usually 99% of the time when on the internet, when anyone compares someone to Hitler and Nazi Germany, it's dumb. It's like Godwin's law. But this isn't just like weirdos on social media. These are major media outlets saying that China is the new Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I mean, this is outrageous, because on one hand you have very detailed records of millions of Jews and other minorities being exterminated by the Nazis. And on the one hand, where are the deaths? Where is the mass death in Xinjiang? right? And now people are backtracking. So, oh no, it's not a genocide. It's a cultural genocide, right? And then when you really press them on that, because like, wait, Uyghur language is still being spoken on the street, still being
And
taught
taught
in
in schools.
Yeah, taught in schools. All the signs are still in Uyghur. What do you mean? They go like, oh, they're commodifying the culture. They're performing. They're forced to perform their Uyghur culture for the Han tourists. I'm like, okay. So we went from like genocide to like kitschy tourism. I mean, you guys are crazy. You're calling this Nazi Germany? Like,
Meanwhile, here is an article in Foreign Policy, the elite establishment voice of the U.S. foreign policy bipartisan status quo, a notorious vehicle for genocide denial. Right? This is their headline: State Department lawyers conclude insufficient evidence to prove genocide in China. So even the U.S. government's, the U.S. State Department's own lawyers, this is from February 2021, the U.S. State Department's own lawyers admit that there's no evidence of genocide. But here's an article in the Forward, which is another rag. The Beijing Olympics looks a lot like Nazi Germany's. I mean, it's incredible. Like, this is the insane, unhinged propaganda we're talking about. It's been stupid, but it's literally at the level now. They've crossed the Rubicon. They've jumped the shark. And now it's okay in mainstream media to say that China equals Nazism.
Yeah, I mean, this is all preparing the population for war. Basically, you know, they're preparing the U.S. public to accept that China is the enemy. You know, like, even despite the fact that we, you know, I missed the memo where we declare war on China, but they're preparing people mentally to think of China as the other, the ultimate enemy of the U.S. state and U.S. empire, and like, this is how somehow China became an existential threat to American way of life. You know, I don't know how that happened, but that's what they're going with it.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. It's really frustrating. So let's talk a little bit more about another point that's really dumb, but we should at least acknowledge it, which is this propaganda also that the food at the Chinese Olympics is like really bad. We should just laugh at this. You don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but there's been so much propaganda saying that like China is bad because the food is apparently bad at the Winter Olympics. And you made fun of some of these Western journalists in China who are in China, but they don't speak Chinese. And like there's this thing about like miso soup, and there's all this other propaganda where apparently people are claiming that like the food is bad and therefore that China is bad because it supposedly served bad food.
I think they're really running out of things to pick faults with China, right? Like there was before this, there was I think Reuters, a journalist, she wrote a whole thing about how it was a total dystopia when she went to get a cocktail and the server was wearing the whole hazmat suit. And so I'm like, no. Dystopia is to get COVID with your cocktail and think that's normal, right? I mean, like
900,000 people dying in the U.S. and then the government just saying, no more mandates, nothing happening. We can just go on normal. Nothing's going on as people are dying. Like, that's not dystopian.
Yeah, I mean, like that she like, these are a bunch of spoiled journalists who get like a full expense paid trip, right? And they're complaining like high school students about their school lunch, basically, and like they're complaining about, say, the Western section of the food. Why don't you just try Chinese food? they're complaining about the latest complaint was, the Beijing Olympics village. They can't do the medium rare steak because of the COVID, because they wanted to make sure it's well done because there's a COVID policy. So instead they get the well done steak and a ketchup with it. I'm like, maybe some people commented maybe they're just cooking it to Donald Trump's standards, you know, well cooked steak with ketchup. But really, these are the things these are the things they're complaining about. These are CNN journalists, New York Times journalists. they're really running out of things to find fault with the Olympics. Like they're really reaching now.
Yeah, and it also shows that I think a lot of them really don't actually believe that China is Nazi Germany, because if they truly believe that China was committing genocide, it's the new Nazi Germany, why would they be complaining so much about the food? Like that's like being in, if they truly believed that being in Beijing now is like being in Berlin in the 1930s, so we're supposed to believe that that if they were in Berlin in the 1930s, they would spend 80% of their time complaining about the Wiener Schnitzel being burnt. Like, I mean, it's just so absurd. And finally, Carl, I want to address this. I'm going to go back to this article that I mentioned in the Financial Times, and I don't know if you've been following this debate in the U.S. and the Congress over the Competes Act. Have you heard of that? The Competes Act.
Oh yeah, I heard about it. Yeah.
So I mentioned this article earlier in Financial Times. It's called Beijing Winter Olympics, the new front line in the US-China Cold War. And in this article, because it's a financial newspaper, they talk largely about the fight over corporate investment in China and the US government forcing US companies to all divest from China. And this is part of this process that people call economic decoupling, right? Yep. And here's a line in the article. They say, President Joe Biden, whose administration will boycott the Beijing Games, has taken a tougher stance than many expected on China over everything from its repression of the Uyghurs to its crackdown on freedom in Hong Kong. A quick note. Look at this propaganda. China's crackdown on freedom in Hong Kong. China hates freedom. It's cracking down on freedom. I mean, it just shows that this is just pure propaganda. It's not even subtle. But anyway, and then they add here, the Biden administration has also implemented measures that make it harder for Beijing to obtain sensitive U.S. technologies, such as semiconductors. And then they're talking about technology and these companies like Nike and H&M, and the campaign to pressure them to cut all of their investments in China. And then they say here that U.S. House lawmakers are preparing to vote on a sprawling 2,912-page China-related bill. So this is a nearly 3,000-page bill. It's called the Competes Act, the America Competes Act, that includes a measure to create a mechanism to screen U.S. investment in China. So what they're really saying is that their strategy now, they quote someone from Human Rights Watch, which is basically an arm of the U.S. government funded by George Soros, who you're not allowed to say his name, but billionaire CIA ally George Soros just did this video where he sounds like a zombie. And like, if you can understand, like through his barely intelligible English, he's like, we must defeat Xi Jinping and the Chinese communists. What all of this is heading toward is that it's part of the economic war. They're saying that all of these companies that sponsored the Beijing Olympics are engaged in genocide. They're complicit in genocide. And the U.S. goal is ultimately all of the U.S. companies leaving China. It seems like that's their strategy, which also is pretty insane, because where are they going to build their iPhones? Like, do they expect them to do that in the U.S.? They would fall apart. Like, so, I mean, what do you think of this America Competes Act and then all of this attempt to get all of these companies to withdraw from China?
Yeah, I mean, like this actually an idea that has been floating around for a couple of years, even back during the Trump era. The idea is decoupling, to decouple the U.S.-China economy, because from the perspective of Pentagon, U.S. and China have been too tightly intertwined economically, and that makes it very messy when the conflict arises. Which means when U.S. is gearing up for war with China, they have to deal with all these like economic entanglement. So let's preempt that by disentangle from China. Get the U.S. investment out of the Chinese market. Cut all the economic ties. So that is the idea of the decouple. The decoupling is designed to make the Cold War 2.0 go easier, because one of the complaints is that China is not like this former Soviet Union, when there was very little trade ties between Soviet Union and US, so it was easier to do all these brinksmanship and creating the tensions. But China is different, because again, we depend on China for for a lot of things, and so they wanted to but I think it's a pipe dream. I think ultimately, like you said, how they're going to replace China in the supply chain. And if anything, the COVID epidemic made China even more important, because right now, because China's zero COVID policy, China is holding up, single-handedly holding up the supply chain right now. Making sure all the goods are still being made and shipped on time. And I think this is just like a brain fart from some U.S. So-called strategic thinkers, and I don't think it's going to pan out. But what is panning out is U.S. currently, I don't know if it's this bill or a different bill. They introduced they're going to spend $500 million to devoting into media and communication to fight so-called disinformation on China. So in other words, they just got 500 million funding to pump out more propaganda in all kind of media channel. I think that maybe that is part of why we're seeing all kind of this crazy Cold War talks about comparing China with Nazi Germany came from. That $500 million is finding its target.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to engage with some of the comments here, and I'll get your perspective as well, Carl. Here's a comment from Brave New Perth. Perspectives on Russian Eurasianism, Russia and China's different geopolitical interests within Central Asia and the Caspian Sea, given the Muslim communities. I'll say I think this is really overstated a lot, especially by the people in the West who are really afraid of this emerging Russian-Chinese alliance. And they are looking for all of these slight points of difference. Obviously, China and Russia are not the same country. They have differences. But one of the things that they've been trying to say is, well, look, they're fighting over Central Asia. But actually, if you look at what happened in Kazakhstan with the attempted coup, the attempted color revolution, it's very clear that China and Russia were right on the same page. If you looked at the comments from Xi Jinping and the Chinese government, they said that they supported the intervention of the CSTU, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and China praised Russia's rapid response. China has also praised the new government in Kazakhstan, and it's very clear that they have an agreement that they're working together, that all these countries are part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of these countries are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So yeah, I mean, China and Russia do have some differences. They do have a history of border disputes, but my understanding from reading different analysis of actual China experts, actual Russia experts, is that those differences are exaggerated. And as Carl mentioned earlier, the irony is that it's U.S. aggression constantly that against both of these countries that has forced them together. So yeah, China and Russia do have differences. I mean, they have differences certainly in system as well. I mean, Russia is not a socialist government. But the reality is that they have much more in common. And because they're both being threatened by the US, NATO, and the EU, it's drawn them together. And the irony is that, if you share an enemy, sometimes the enemy of the enemy is your friend. And they found that not only do they have shared enemies, they have a lot of shared interests. China is the largest importer of energy in the world, and Russia is one of the largest exporters of energy. And they're neighbors. And they have multiple pipelines. They're now building more pipelines, including the Power of Siberia 2. China is going to be more and more dependent on Russian oil and gas exports, and Russia is going to be more dependent on exporting and getting the revenue of its gas and oil to China. So yeah, no alliance is perfect. There are differences between all countries, but my impression is that those differences are pretty exaggerated. I don't know what you think, Carl.
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding, particularly in the West, about the Russia-China relationship. I mean, people still have their mindset stuck in like the Sino-Soviet split era, right? I mean, people don't understand. China and Soviet Union actually made up in 1989. Like 1989, when is this China-Soviet normalization happened? That's when the Gorbachev visited China, visit Deng Xiaoping in Beijing, and ever since 1989, from both China, Soviet Union, and then China, Russia, the Soviet successor state, relationship have been very, very good. The both sides have enjoyed a very good and friendly relationship since then, while at the same time their relationship with the US have worsened because of the NATO expansion, because of the US military posture in East Asia. And China and Russia have different priority, right? Like Russian priority is mostly Europe, a little bit Central Asia. China's priority is mostly East Asia. But in they do have a lot of overlapping interests. For like in Central Asia, they're mostly a lot of times the China and Russia is complementary. You know, their economy is complementary. Um, Ben already pointed out, you know, China imports energy, Russia exports energy, and when it comes to Central Asia, it's very clear China has no interest in taking over kind of as the role of a security provider as Russia is. China is mostly in providing investment into Central Asia, whereas Russia is actually providing the security guarantee. And China is perfectly fine with the arrangement, and Russia is perfectly fine with the Chinese economic inroad into Central Asia. So there's really not much friction or disagreement there. You know, the two countries may have different priorities, but at this current juncture, there's really not much conflict between the two.
Exactly. Yeah. And for people who are interested in this, I did a video and a podcast episode talking about an article I wrote at multipolarista.com. It's called China and Russia Declare New Era of Multipolarity, Challenging U.S. Interventionism. And it's about this over 5,000 word joint statement released by the Chinese and Russian governments after this historic meeting between President Xi and President Putin in Beijing on the day of the inauguration of the Winter Olympics. And it's basically a manifesto, this over 5,000 word document. They outline their view for creating a new multipolar world, challenging the hegemony and unilateralism of the US NATO order. So, I mean, I did a video and a podcast episode about that, you know, going into depth. And they actually address Central Asia in that statement. They address the Eurasian Economic Union. They address the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They address other institutions of regional integration. So again, no alliance is perfect, but they're clearly moving closer and closer together. And the irony is that the more and more that they're attacked by the US and NATO, it only encourages that alliance. And this is the point, you know, we were talking about economic decoupling earlier, and this is the point that economist Michael Hudson often makes, that the irony is that the more the US and the EU impose sanctions on China and Russia, the more it threatens to remove them from the SWIFT system, the more it threatens companies to withdraw from China and Russia. It actually encourages them to be more economically self-sufficient, to develop their own industry so they're not as reliant on other corporations, to be more secure in their investments, to diversify their investments. So while the US pushes for economic decoupling, it's actually strengthening the Chinese and Russian economies. Yes. And that's where we are now. So,
and in a way, U.S. is digging its own grave by, if they're going to cut off Russia from the SWIFT system, because right now, financial control is one of the key pillars of the U.S. empire. You know, it's finance, military, technology. Right, the technology is already coming under threat from the rise of China. So is military. And then if they're gonna self-sabotage themselves by trying to use their current financial hegemony to impose their will on other countries, what's gonna happen is Russia can just switch to use RMB as to resolve their border trade between Russia and China, especially when two increasingly have a larger trade between each other. And another point I want to point out is that China, because its long-term non-interventionist policy, it actually was perfectly fine with Russia taking a more interventionist, muscular foreign policy. Like the example of that is in Syria. Like China provided economic lifeline to Syria, while Russia is doing all the military heavy lifting by going in and blowing up all the jihadists. So they actually work together. Like China is fine with being the kind of the money man, the financier, and have the Russia take like the front seat into actually sending its troops out.
Yeah, and there's a good comment here from Bauk Jan Duma that points out that Bauke Jan Duma, sorry, I screwed up your name, but they say talk about Blinken's recent plea to Wang Yi, that's the Chinese foreign minister, to intervene in Ukraine. And the answer was that China said, we support Russia. China said the West is the US specifically is trying to cause a war in Ukraine. The Global Times, which is kind of de facto represents like a kind of certain faction of the Communist Party of China. It's owned by the People's Daily, which is the official organ of the Communist Party of China. They published an article explicitly saying that the US is trying to start a war in Ukraine, even though of all the parties involved, it's the farthest away from Ukraine. So China, I mean, that's again another example of China saying that we support Russia. And here, thanks to all the super chats, thanks to the super chat from Joel Bergmark, who asked, it would seem that there is a propaganda campaign from the US to liberal and state media in Europe. Any thoughts on if and how such a global campaign exists, or if it's perception bias? No, I mean, there's no question whatsoever that the propaganda campaign against China is insane. I don't know how you can look at any of this stuff. I actually just did a video here at this channel, Multipolarista, just laughing at some of the propaganda. Carl, you always follow the anti-China propaganda, like the slow train story recently. What's some of the other really stupid propaganda you've seen against China recently?
Okay, that slow train have to be up there, because how did they put it? They say, all the rapid rolling out of high-speed rail network in China is putting well, maybe, yeah, the vanishing slow trains of China, the time-honored ritual of a long, slow train journey. No, look, people had a long, slow train journey because they had to, because back then they had no choice. And nobody wants to take like extra days on the road in order to see their family. That's not a romantic picture. For like a very spoiled Western journalist, that maybe sounds like a romantic idea, to be stuck in the trains with like thousands of other people packed wall to wall,
Shadi Haza wrote, but at what cost, Carl? At what cost?
Yeah, at the cost of getting home faster. I mean, right now, everybody, especially during the New Year's, people take trains to reach their home, to reach their families. Who wants to spend extra time on the road, stuck on the train? This is just mind-boggling.
No, exactly. And it's like no one in the world who has to sit on like a 10-day train is thinking, oh, I love this. I would hate to have a fast train where I could. No, it's just copium. It's pure copium.
On top of that, slow trains still exist in China. There are still places. I was in China in 2019. I took the slow train all the way across to China because I have the time to spend, and I decided to go for the experience. So slow trains still exist, and the Chinese government decided to keep the slow trains running for the people who for the people of lower income, so they can afford it's an affordable way to travel. So both options. Now you can pay a little more for high speed train, or if you don't have much money, you can pay for the slow train. It's not like either or, but they're making it sounds like it's a genocide of the slow trains in China. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's another comment here from Shadi Haza about the Laos Railway, which just opened up. And there was all this propaganda about this new railway built in Laos, which is incredible, where I'll just play a quick video of this, and it's insanely fast, but it's seen as like bad because the propaganda is that Laos is being trapped in debt, supposedly, to build this rail, this incredibly fast rail. Here's a video from CGTN, and it's this beautiful, extremely fast train that this is in a relatively poor country. The U.S. doesn't even have infrastructure like this. And
on top of that, U.S. is the one that bombed Laos, back during the Vietnam War. Like Laos was one of the most bombed country in the world because U.S. has dumped millions of ordnance in Laos. Millions of ordnance are still unexploded. The Chinese engineers, when they built the China-Laos Railway, they actually have to spend 2 years to remove all these unexploded mines and ordnance on the way, in order just to build the railway. But U.S. is the one that's talking about how this is an example of Chinese imperialism. I mean, Chinese imperialism is apparently to build a railway, and the fact that the people don't understand is, why would China want to trap Laos? The whole point of China building a rail line to Laos is to connect to Thailand and rest of Southeast Asia. There's a whole project called the Pan-Asian Railway that allow you to take trains from China all the way to Singapore. So that is an end goal. Like, what's the point of trapping Laos when if the Laos government can just say, hey, we don't want your train no more, we're going to shut down the line and you can't go anywhere. The difference is Laos is actually a sovereign country. They can make their own decisions. Chinese government is not pulling a gun to the Laos government's head, like, take my railroad now and
take these fast trains. Yeah. We're going to genocide all of the slow trains in the world.
Yeah,
that's real Chinese genocide. Is they want to genocide all slow trains everywhere and replace them with fast ones.
Yeah.
Here is Chinese imperialism, the evil Chinese imperialism. Here's an article I just published at multipolarista.com. China agrees to help Nicaragua develop infrastructure, hospitals, renewable energy. China, representatives of China and the Sandinista government just signed an agreement this week to develop hospitals, renewable energy, medical equipment, roads, railways, and ports, and also to develop their water and public health system.
I remember somebody wrote something about China being debt trapping Central America with all these like they have a chart, a map of all these Chinese hospitals and dams and power plants China built. I'm like, you're making China looking good. It's like, but this is like, no, this is the map of Chinese debt trap.
The IMF debt traps a country by giving them billions of dollars that they use to fund all their rich friends and cronies, and it's not used to actually build anything. And China supposedly, in scare quotes, it debt traps countries by, drumroll, building hospitals. Or here's another example of horrible Chinese imperialism. China is helping Nicaragua's Sandinista government build houses for poor people. And this is another agreement that they just signed a few weeks ago, in which China is going to help expand the Nicaraguan government's public housing program to build houses for poor people. So horrible Chinese imperialism.
We need some Chinese imperialism in the United States. I'm just going to put it out there. We could use that in California.
Exactly. All right, here's another super chat from Brave New Perth. Will Muslims in Central Asia accept Eurasian economic integration given Turkey can support the Crimean Tatars and Uyghurs? Is chaos beyond the horizon? This is a good question. I mean, we can't talk about Muslims as one group, right? Like there's over 1 billion Muslims in the world, and the varieties of Islam practiced, especially in Central Asia, compared to countries like Turkey or the Persian Gulf or Iran, it's all very different, obviously. Not just Sunni and Shia, but also there's a lot of varieties within Sunni Islam. And in Central Asia, my understanding is that a lot of it tends to be very secular. Like, they're Muslims, but a lot of them tend to be much more secular Muslims because of their experience in the Soviet Union. And so, yeah, there are extremist groups that Turkey has been exploiting. And in fact, the allegations made by Russia and China are that there were these Salafi jihadi extremist groups involved in the Kazakhstan coup attempt this January, and that allegedly some of them were speaking Arabic, which suggests that Turkey may have sent over some jihadis from Syria, just as they did in the Nagorno-Karabakh war against Armenia, the war over Artsakh in Armenia. So it's and between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it's possible that Turkey will support some of these extremist groups. But my understanding is that they have very little influence, especially in Central Asia. And that actually the whole reason that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was originally created, it actually wasn't created for economic integration. The reason the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was created was to fight what they call the three evils, which are extremism, separatism, and fundamentalism, I think, right?
Terrorism. I think terrorism.
Yeah. And that's so actually the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was originally created as a block to counter extremism. And it's become more and more of a form of economic integration. So, I mean, that's my analysis. I don't know if you agree with that, Carl.
Yeah, I think, when you talk about Eurasian economic integration, there's not just one model. There's like different countries have their own idea of this Eurasian economic integration. For China, it's Belt and Road. For Russia, they have, the kind of, they have the customer union, right? And Turkey's role in Central Asia, I would say, have diminished since 1990s because during 1990s, at the collapse of Soviet Union, Turkey did move in, and because their ethnic and linguistic ties to Central Asia, and because they're relatively affluent compared to the Central Asian nation, they did wield a certain level of influence. But today, I mean, China and Russia has way more influence in Central Asia than Turkey, and I don't think Turkey is not much of a factor there.
Here's another comment. Thank you again for all the super chats. This is from Joel Bergmark again. Let me rephrase. I work for Huawei. Oh, okay. So Chinese Communist Party agent here. No, but cool. Very cool to hear from someone who works for Huawei. And he says it's easy to see the propaganda, but it seems coordinated and tied to U.S. interests. If so, it must be traceable and possible to expose the mechanism orchestrating it. Great comment, great point. First of all, absolutely. I mean, all you have to do is look at where these so-called stories are coming from, and usually they're fed to the media by U.S. intelligence. So, I mean, there's so many examples of that in coverage of China and Russia, where it's all these anonymous CIA officials and whoever, and British intelligence officials. But also, I think you can also clearly see that these corporate media outlets do have investors. They have corporate investors, some of whom are competing with Chinese companies, especially companies like Huawei. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that it's clear that there's traceable networks of propaganda. Go ahead, Carl.
Huawei in particular case, because Huawei is one of the Chinese tech company that's starting to challenge the U.S. tech hegemony. And for example, like before Huawei and other Chinese phone makers are basically based on the Android model, right? And Android is owned by Google. But Huawei started to doing research to do their Harmony OS, and they're starting to branch into the chip design. So that's eating into the pie of the U.S. tech giants like Google, right? And like Google, Eric Schmidt, actually the former CEO of Google, is at the forefront of pushing for all these kind of economic sanctions, including the semiconductor chip bans, against Huawei, against China. So yes, definitely there's when I came to United States in 1990s, I remember there was at least two camps in US. There's a pro-containment camp and pro-engagement camp. And it was very clear that pro-containment camp was sponsored by the Pentagon and all the military intelligence complex. And the pro-engagement camp is basically the U.S. business lobby who wanted to go to China, exploit labor, exploit Chinese market. But now we're in 2022, and what happened is with the rise of Chinese economy, when China start to climb the ladder of productivity, firms like Huawei starting to challenge the U.S. tech hegemony, and that is unacceptable. And if you look at the U.S. S&P 500, a huge percentage of that is just the big five, right? That it's just Google, Facebook, Apple. Like
Which are all Pentagon contractors, and some of them are CIA contractors too.
Exactly. They all work very closely with the U.S. government. So now that's why now you pretty much don't see the pro-engagement camp in U.S. anymore. It's all like pro-containment, all pro like decoupling, and that's why we're getting into this Cold War 2.0 situation.
Yeah, here's another comment from Joel Bergman, which is pretty incredible. He says, even state TV in Sweden does things that are so absurd. And since January 1st, we have a, quote, Ministry of Psychological Defense in Sweden that is a pure propaganda agency. No, I mean, it shows exactly what the modus operandi is more and more propaganda, more brainwashing with this kind of like Orwellian Ministry of Truth. And by the way, speaking of Sweden, we also see Sweden talking more and more about joining NATO. And of course, not just the anti-China propaganda, but the anti-Russia propaganda, which, as we said earlier, just keeps pushing China and Russia together. I mean, it's really incredible. I mean, the Obama administration, they recognized that they were trying to reach out to Russia and have better relations with Russia. And then the Trump administration and Steve Bannon, clearly, that's why they were so attacked for being supposedly Russian agents. It was an attempt by the intelligence agencies to prevent them from normalizing with Russia, which ironically, that actually just it was the final nail in the coffin of U.S. hegemony, because Russiagate prevented, the Trumpists wanted to try to form an alliance with Russia against China. That was their strategy. Steve Bannon said it openly. And of course, it was pie in the sky because Putin was not going to go along with that. But there are people in the Kremlin who are more pro-Russian, pro-Western.
The West, yeah.
Who would like to ally with NATO against China. But that's just not going to happen at this point. Russiagate destroyed that. This whole thing now with Ukraine trying to sabotage the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They've done everything they can to push Russia and China together. And that's why there's so much propaganda now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like Sweden is one of those weird countries because it's apparently one of the more anti-China country. At first, I didn't understand why that is, because Sweden is so far from China and it has any kind of security threat from China. But then I realized, okay, it's because Sweden is anti-Russia and because Russia and China are moving closer together. So to be anti-Russia, that means you have to be also anti-China, which is a really weird logic because, even given the crazy thing that going on in Ukraine, China is actually have a pretty friendly relationship with both Russia and Ukraine, right? But Sweden is the one that decided, no, I'm going to go with the NATO, right? I'm going to go 100% jump on the NATO ship. It's just absurd.
Well, I want to be sensitive of Carl's time because he's in Indonesia and it's really late there. So we're going to start wrapping up in the next few minutes. I want to thank all of the super chats. Martin Rad, I appreciate the kind words about me and about Carl. I mean, Carl's a genius, so it's always very fun having him on, an actual China expert. As we wrap up here, Carl, thanks to Matthew Rains for the super chat. Thanks to F. Liu. Thanks to Red Pill, who wrote love, peace, freedom, and happiness. So great things to hope for. As in the next 5-10 minutes, as we wrap up here, Carl, I want to ask about Indonesia. I mean, if you don't mind talking about it, because you on social media, you talk a lot about being in Indonesia. I know that Indonesia and China have pretty good relations and that Indonesia is leaning more toward China in the new Cold War. What are things like in terms of the new Cold War we're talking about? What are things like in Southeast Asia right now?
So Indonesia is actually an interesting case because the current Indonesian government is pretty friendly with China, but the Indonesian military has a traditional tie with the United States and CIA. This is the same people that did the 1966, 1965 coup and purged the country of communism.
And genocide.
Yes, and genocide.
That the CIA backed.
Yeah, some of those people are still there, and they still have U.S. ties. And in fact, the current defense chief in Indonesia have been visiting United States. U.S. is working, still putting its tentacles into Indonesia. But the civilian government in Indonesia, since the overthrow of the dictator Suharto, has been pretty pretty friendly with China, and there's a lot of Chinese economic project going on in the country. One of the biggest is the high-speed rail network. They're building China is building
more genocide of slow trains.
Yes, they're building a high-speed rail between Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, to Bandung on Java. So like the planned completion date is 2022, end of 2022 this year. It might be delayed because of pandemic, but I'm pretty sure Indonesia is gonna have high-speed rail running before United States ever does. So that's where we are right now. Indonesia is gonna have a high-speed rail before United States.
More Chinese genocide of slow trains. Well, I think this is a good comment to end on here from Peace Hippie Trollster. Keep up the awesome work, comrades. You can see this is obviously a Communist Party of China bot agent because they use comrades.
This is how Chinese government keep us funded by these like $5 donations, right?
$5 super chat donations on YouTube from Australia. All right, well, Carl, where can people find your work if they want to get more of your great content from the real China expert? Well,
you can find me on Twitter. My name is just Carl Zha, spelled the way that's here. Carl Zha, one word on Twitter. And I also have a podcast called the Silk and Steel Podcast by Carl Zha. So you can find you can find my I have a Patreon page, so that's how I am supported right now. Basically, I'm able to allow me to live in Indonesia and support my family. Check out my Patreon.
In addition to all the Chinese government propaganda money.
Yeah, they're cutting me checks in like $5 donations, Patreon donations every month, and so come check out my Patreon content, support me. Or just check out my YouTube channel. Check out my I have YouTube channel. Check out my Twitter. I put my free stuff on YouTube, and I also put my free content on all kind of podcasting platform like iTunes, Spotify. You can find Silk and Steel.
Yeah, and if people are watching this on YouTube, I have links to his Patreon and his Twitter below in the YouTube. And also, if people want to, I don't really use Twitch, but I do stream all of these on Twitch. So if you want to go over to Twitch to watch these streams, which I do at least once a week, you can go over to twitch.tv/multipolarista, and you can find this stream. You can find my past streams. So it's twitch.tv.
How are people watching this stream right now?
I think they're mostly on YouTube, the vast majority.
Oh, but you're streaming on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right now.
But,
okay, got it.
But I'm also on Twitch, and for people who want to follow over at Rockfin, you can go to rockfin.com/Benjamin Norton, and I'm streaming this over there as well. So nice. At Rockfin, at Twitch, and at YouTube. And like I said, you should go and check out Carl's great podcast. I've learned a lot from it. And we'll see you all next time. It's pretty late there in Indonesia, so I think Carl wants to go to bed. So thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for speaking about all these, dumb Western propagandists. It was fun making fun of them, Carl.
Yeah, we should do it again. This is fun.
Yeah, I'll have you again soon.
Yeah,
great.
Awesome.
All right. See you, everyone.
Good night, people.